Why did the mountains feel different that morning, as if they were holding their breath for something she hadn't yet dared to name? Alina felt it before she heard anything, an old instinct stirring in the quiet she'd spent years trying to cultivate. The valley below her cabin was usually a place of predictable rhythms: sheep bells, distant chatter from the village, the soft crackle of her kettle heating by the window. But on that morning, something pressed against the edges of her calm, an unease carried on the wind like a whisper she couldn't ignore. She stepped outside, boots sinking into the dry earth, and scanned the horizon with the kind of attention she used to give war zones. It annoyed her, the way old habits resurfaced without permission. She'd left that life behind, closed it with a trembling hand years ago. Yet here she was again, listening for things most people never noticed. A shift in the wind, a pause in the birdsong, a silence that felt too heavy to be natural. Then the radio crackled. The sound was so unexpected that her breath hitched. She hadn't touched that old Ranger Band radio in, what, 5 years? 6. She kept it only out of a sense of duty she couldn't quite shake, tucked away on a dusty shelf under a stack of tools. It shouldn't have been on. It shouldn't have had power. But when she stepped back into her cabin, the light on its panel was glowing faintly, as if refusing to die. A voice burst through, raw, frantic, half swallowed by gunfire. Anyone? Anyone, we're surrounded. Coordinates. Another burst of automatic fire drowned him out. 6 hostiles closing fast, truck overturned, we're pinned. Does anyone copy? Alina froze. The kettle whistled behind her, but she didn't turn. Her pulse sank deep, steadying into a rhythm she thought she'd forgotten. She reached for the radio before she could talk herself out of it, fingers hovering over the call button. But she hesitated. She had promised herself, no more battles, no more ghosts. The man's voice cracked again, younger than she expected, someone who still believed he wasn't supposed to die on a nameless patch of dirt. Any unit nearby, please, someone respond. We're losing ground. She closed her eyes. The mountains around her seemed to exhale as if urging her forward. She could walk away, let someone else answer. But something in the soldier's tone, fear, yes, but also a stubborn refusal to surrender, tugged at the parts of herself she'd tried to bury. Her thumb pressed the transmission key, almost on its own. Copy that. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Hold position. The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. She imagined the pinned-down team staring at their radio, wondering who the hell she was. Who is this?" the soldier asked, breathless. "Just a friend," she said quietly. That was all she allowed herself. Then, after a beat, 3 miles northwest of your position. Dust will lift in 30 seconds. Watch for the wind shift. Another long pause, then softer, "Ma'am, are you sure?" She didn't answer. She was already moving. Her storage trunk sat beneath her bed, covered in a thin layer of dust. She knelt beside it, hands trembling, not from fear, but from memory. The metal latches clicked open, and with them came the scent of old oil and steel. Inside lay the rifle she'd promised never to touch again. Her M24. The barrel still carried the faint silver etching she'd carved years ago. One shot, one soul saved. Back then, she had needed reminders that not every bullet meant destruction, that sometimes precision meant protection. She traced the etching with her thumb, feeling the grooves like old scars. "You're not that person anymore," she whispered to herself. "You don't do this." But outside, the wind shifted again, carrying the distant pop of gunfire. It wasn't her fight. Yet she knew this valley better than anyone. Every ridge, every dip in the terrain, every pocket of wind that curved around the hills. If she didn't help, no one else would reach them in time. Alina's jaw tightened. Promises were strange things. They bent under the weight of conscience. She assembled the rifle with movements that were too practiced, too familiar. Muscle memory guided her hands while her mind argued with itself. She felt the old ache in her chest, the one that came from knowing you couldn't outrun the parts of your soul that refused to die. Outside, the sky carried that harsh midday brightness that distorted distance and shadow. Heat shimmered across the plains like a mirage. To most people, 3 miles was an impossible shot. To her, it was a test of patience and truth. She'd spent years trying to silence the skill that had once defined her. But silence only holds so long before it cracks. She reached the ridge behind her cabin, the one she used to sit on during sunsets when she wanted to pretend her past was farther away than it actually was. Today, she dropped to the earth with the calmness of someone returning to an old, painful home. Down in the valley, she spotted the overturned truck. 6 soldiers pinned behind it, huddled close, firing back in short, desperate bursts. Dust exploded around them with every incoming round. They were outnumbered, outplayed, running out of time. Alina exhaled slowly. She adjusted her scope. The world narrowed. Everything outside the crosshairs faded. Years of quiet living fell away like dead leaves. The wind brushed her cheek, left to right, steady, predictable. She calculated distance, drop, drift. Every detail slid into place with the gentle certainty of a puzzle snapping together. But beneath her steady hands lurked something darker. The part of her that knew what taking this shot meant. It meant stepping back into the world she'd run from. It meant opening the old wound she'd sealed with isolation and soil and the pretense of peace. "Don't miss," she whispered to herself, not out of fear of failure, but because missing would mean admitting she'd lost the one thing she always counted on: control. She breathed in, held, fired. The crack echoed across the valley, sharp enough to slice through the gunfire. One attacker dropped instantly. The soldiers behind the truck froze, confusion flickering across their faces. A second shot. Another silhouette vanished. She felt an odd mixture building inside. Relief, dread, clarity. She didn't want this. Didn't want the familiar coldness rising in her chest. But saving lives wasn't cold. It was necessary. Below, one of the rangers pointed toward her ridge. Sunlight flashed off her scope, giving her position away. She didn't flinch. If they saw her, fine. She didn't hide because she wasn't ashamed of helping. But she couldn't escape the truth whispering in her mind. "You swore you'd never pick up this rifle again, and yet here you are." The last of the immediate attackers fell. The valley quieted. But she knew it wasn't over. Trouble never ended that quickly. And as she scanned the terrain again, she spotted movement deeper in the brush. More figures, more danger. She wasn't done. But part of her wasn't just fighting the men in her crosshairs. She was fighting herself, the version of her who wanted to stay hidden on her quiet hill, and the version who had once stood tall in desert storms, guiding whole units home with her precision. The soldier's voice came back through the radio, softer this time. "Ma'am, whoever you are, you just saved us." She didn't answer. Not yet. She kept watching, kept listening, kept weighing the cost of stepping back into a world she thought she'd left behind. Because there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Something that made her hands shake, even as she steadied her aim. And 3 miles away, surrounded by enemies, those men still had no idea how much one woman on a lonely hill was about to change their fate. What was it about the quiet moments after violence that always unsettled her the most? Alina lay prone on the ridge long after the echoes faded, long after the dust from her shots drifted back to the earth. Most people feared the battle. She feared the minutes after, when her breath slowed, when her mind caught up, when the weight of what she'd done pressed against her ribs like a reminder she couldn't ignore. She should have pulled back, should have put the rifle away, walked back to her cabin and convinced herself it wasn't her fight, but the valley below her didn't lie. The patterns of movement were too familiar. The quiet wasn't victory, it was concealment, and in concealment danger grew. She scanned the lower terrain again. Brush near the dry streambed shifted in a way that had nothing to do with wind. Shadows crawled along the rocks in jittery patterns, too coordinated to be animal, too cautious to be civilian. Whoever had pinned those rangers wasn't done. They were adjusting, spreading, preparing for a second push. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't random. This wasn't some skirmish in the middle of nowhere. Someone had set a trap. Her finger brushed against the trigger guard, but she didn't fire. Not yet. She needed to understand the angles, the movements, the intent, and that meant she had to stay in the open longer than she wanted. "Ma'am, do you copy?" The younger ranger's voice broke through the radio, lower now, reverent but still trembling with adrenaline. We don't know who you are, but we owe you our lives." Alina's throat tightened in a way she hadn't expected. Compliments always felt heavier than bullets, because she didn't know what to do with them. She pressed her lips together, inhaled once, and finally responded. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "You're not safe." Silence answered her, followed by a muttered curse from one of the soldiers on the other end. She imagined them glancing over the truck, trying to see what she saw. But they couldn't. They didn't have her vantage point, or her experience, or her ghosts teaching them where to look. She shifted her weight, recalibrating her scope. The attackers weren't approaching recklessly this time. They were splitting, taking high elevations on both sides of the valley. Classic pincer movement. Someone among them knew tactics. Someone wanted the rangers dead badly enough to commit to a full sweep. In the pauses between gunfire, she could hear her own heartbeat, the slow, controlled rhythm she'd trained into herself years ago. But beneath it, a different rhythm pulsed. Guilt. Unfinished. Unsettled. She hadn't fired a rifle in years because the last time she had, she'd made a choice that haunted her to this day. A shot that saved a convoy. A shot that cost her something she could never reclaim. She pushed the memory away, but memories were stubborn things. They clung to silence like shadows to light. "Ma'am, what do we do?" the ranger asked. She didn't want to lead. She didn't want responsibility. She didn't want the weight of lives in her hands again. But the valley didn't care what she wanted. Duty had a way of finding people who tried too hard to run from it. "Shift east," she said quietly. "There's a rock shelf 30 meters from your truck. Better cover. Move on my shot." "Your shot at what?" She didn't answer. She already had the target in her scope. A figure mid-crawl along the upper ridge, trying to position himself above the ranger's escape route. Patient, stealthy, dangerous. He moved like someone who had trained for years. She exhaled. She fired. The shot cracked across the valley, sharp enough that even the mountains seemed to flinch. The figure collapsed silently, sliding down the loose gravel with a muted thud. That, she said into the radio, was at what move now. The rangers scrambled, dragging each other toward the rock shelf she'd pointed out. One limped heavily, another covered his side with a shaking hand. They were scared, exhausted, still too young to hide the fear in their movements. Alina tracked their path, adjusting her angle for the shifting threat. She spotted 3 more attackers emerging from the scrub, moving with coordinated, deliberate steps. Her skin prickled. This wasn't a rogue group. This was trained, possibly hired, possibly hunting someone specific. Which raised the question she didn't want to ask. Why this valley? Why now? Why these rangers? She felt something cold coil in her stomach. They were bait. Or worse, their presence was a mistake, and they had stumbled into something meant for someone else entirely. Her finger twitched. Not yet. She needed them closer to open ground before she took the shot. As the rangers reached the rock shelf and pressed themselves against the uneven stone, the younger one spoke again, this time with something bordering on hope. "Ma'am, what's your name? I feel like I should." "Names don't matter right now," she cut in, too sharp, too defensive. She hated the question, not because she wanted to hide, but because names tied people to expectations, and expectations led to disappointment, or worse, trust. And she didn't need trust right now, she needed clarity. But the soldier didn't back down. "We're out here fighting blind. I need something to hold on to." His vulnerability clawed at her. She forced a breath, forcing steel into her voice. "Hold on to your rifle and stay alive." Another shadow crossed her scope, closer, moving with purpose. She centered her aim. Fired again. A third enemy fell. "Ma'am," the ranger whispered, awestruck, "how far out are you?" She hesitated, not because she was ashamed of the truth, but because the truth carried weight, and she'd spent years trying to set that weight down. 3 miles, she finally said. The radio went dead silent. 3 miles wasn't just skill. It was discipline. It was decades of muscle memory. It was something most soldiers never came close to mastering. A moment later, one of the rangers whispered low, reverent, You're a sniper." She didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. The title felt too small, too incomplete for what she had once been and what she had lost. She watched their shapes tuck deeper into the rock crease, and for the first time since picking up the rifle, she felt a pulse of something she hadn't felt in years. Responsibility. Not the heavy kind, the anchor, the steadying kind that reminded her she still had purpose, some ember still alive inside her. But purpose came with price, and as she shifted her position to get a clearer angle on the approaching threat, her leg brushed against the pebble-strewn ridge, and a ghost of a memory returned. The last briefing she'd ever sat in, the last time she'd worn the uniform, the last time she'd let herself believe she could save everyone. She blinked hard, pushing the ache back. Not now. Not here. In the valley, the attackers were regrouping. 5 remained, maybe more hidden. They were learning their lesson, moving quicker, tighter, no longer giving her clean shots. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know what she could do. But she knew something they didn't. She wasn't just fighting for the Rangers now. She was fighting against the part of herself that had once believed she didn't deserve to save anyone ever again. And with every trigger pull, that belief cracked just a little more. What made her so certain the danger wasn't over? The valley looked quiet enough for a stranger to mistake the silence for safety, but Alina had learned the hard way that silence often came before the worst decisions, both on the battlefield and within herself. She adjusted her position along the ridge, shifting her weight to ease the pressure in her shoulder. The familiar ache there wasn't from age. It was from memory, a reminder of the last mission she'd ever walked away from. Below, the Rangers held tight behind the rock shelf, catching their breath. She could almost feel their exhaustion from 3 miles away, the tremor in their arms, the adrenaline wearing thin, the heaviness of realizing they weren't out of this yet. They were kids wearing uniforms too big for their fears, pretending they had everything under control. She hated how familiar that looked. The radio crackled softly, a different voice this time, older, steadier, strained. "Unknown shooter, this is Sergeant Cole. If you can hear me, we're still here." Alina exhaled. She hadn't heard him speak since the first desperate call. His silence earlier had worried her, though she would never admit that even to herself. "I hear you," she replied quietly. There was a pause, a long, weighted one. She imagined Cole studying his surroundings, trying to piece together her exact location. Not because he wanted to find her, but because being saved by a stranger always came with its own kind of unease. "How long have you been watching us?" Cole finally asked. "Long enough." Another silence. She didn't fill it. She never had been good at explaining herself. The truth was too tangled anyway, knotted with guilt and decisions she regretted. "You alone up there?" Cole asked, more gently this time. She hesitated. The real question behind his words was, "Are you alone?" It was something heavier. "Why would someone like you be up there by yourself?" Alina steadied her breathing. "Yes, alone." Cole didn't respond. Not immediately. She sensed his confusion, maybe even disbelief. To most, 3 miles was impossible, but impossibility was often just something people hadn't seen done yet. Movement flickered in her peripheral vision. She swung the scope westward. The attackers were shifting again, but not toward the Rangers. They were circling. No coordinating. Her heart clenched. This wasn't about the Rangers. This was about her. They had marked her shots, found the source, and now they wanted to eliminate the threat on the ridge. She swallowed hard, adjusting her angle. She wasn't worried for herself. That wasn't the emotion curling inside her chest. It was something closer to frustration, because she'd put the Rangers in even more danger simply by helping. "Sergeant," she said, voice low, steady. "You have incoming, not toward you, toward the northwest, toward me." The radio stayed quiet for a few seconds. She imagined the look Cole must have exchanged with his men, pale faces, wide eyes, a subtle ripple through the group. "Then we come to you," Cole said firmly. "No," her voice cracked sharper than she meant. "Absolutely not." "Ma'am." "You move now and they'll spot you," she snapped. "You stay put and I keep you alive. That's the deal." She wasn't sure why she used the word deal. Maybe because agreements were easier than trust. Maybe because deals felt less personal. Cole let out a slow breath, audible even through the static. "You can't fight them alone." "I'm not fighting them," she murmured. "I'm delaying them." "Delaying why would?" But she cut him off again. She saw the first enemy crest the lower ridge, cautious, slow, expecting a sharpshooter's trap. Smart, too smart. These weren't bandits. They weren't amateurs. Whoever they were, they came prepared for someone like her. She fired. The crack rolled across the valley like a thunderclap. The man dropped instantly, his rifle tumbling down the rocks. Below, she could almost feel the Rangers flinch at the sound. Another figure sprinted behind a boulder. She shifted, fired twice, missed the first shot, hit the second. She cursed under her breath. Not a clean hit. He still crawled forward, clutching his leg. She fired again. He stilled. Her hand steadied on the rifle, but something inside her trembled, subtle, deep. Not from fear. From the old ache she hadn't faced in years. The one shot she'd regretted. The one shot that had ended her career. The one shot she'd sworn she'd never take again. She closed her eyes just for a second, but in that second the past surged up without permission. A convoy. A split-second decision. A child stepping out from behind a truck at the wrong time. She had pulled the trigger before she even registered the tiny movement. Her training, her reflexes, they had all acted faster than her humanity. They told her afterward it wasn't her fault. They told her it was an accident. They told her she had saved dozens of soldiers by neutralizing the threat the child had unknowingly shielded. But no explanation dulled the memory. She'd held the rifle for one more mission after that, but her hands shook so much she could barely load a round. So she left, disappeared, built a quiet life where no one knew her name, where she could pretend she didn't still see those small, shadowed eyes every time she closed her own. The radio jolted her back to the present. "Ma'am," Cole's voice softened, "are you still with us?" She swallowed. It took effort. "Yes." Another pause, not tactical, human. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. His tone carried something she hadn't heard from a soldier in years. Not respect, not awe. Understanding. It rattled her more than gunfire ever could. "I'm fine," she lied. But her voice betrayed her. Cole heard it. She knew he did. "Alina," he said suddenly, as if testing her name, as if tasting it on the air. "That's what the village boy called you, the ghost woman on the hill." She stiffened. "Don't say my name." "It's who you are." "No," her grip tightened on the rifle. "It's who I was." But even as she said it, another attacker broke through the brush, sprinting toward the ridge where she lay. She didn't have time to finish the thought. She fired. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. The attacker fell forward, sliding hard. Dust swirled in the wind. Cole's voice rose, urgent now. "How many are left?" "Too many," she whispered. "More than I can see." And you expect us to stay hidden? Yes. Why? Because if they moved, she would lose them. Because if they ran to her, they would die in the open. Because if she let them come closer, they would see the look in her eyes, the look of someone who had already lost too much. But the real reason sat heavy in her chest. Because she didn't trust herself to protect them up close. Because distance was the only thing she was good at. Because distance meant she couldn't hurt them the way she had hurt others. Alina, Cole said softly, what happened to you out here? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she watched the brush move again. Another shadow rising. Another threat. She steadied her aim, pushed the past down into the quiet place where she kept it buried, and whispered to herself. One shot, one soul saved. Then she pulled the trigger. How much longer could she keep this up before the past finally caught her? Alina felt the question tightening in her chest as she reloaded, each smooth motion betraying how deeply the old habits still lived in her bones. She had hoped time would dull them, that living quietly would erase the sharp edges of who she'd been. But every shot she took today carved those edges back into shape. Across the valley, the attackers regrouped, not retreating, not panicking, adapting. Too calm, too organized. Alina sensed something shifting in their formation, something she recognized from her years overseas, from the missions that stayed with her like shadows that refused to step into daylight. This wasn't a band of smugglers or rebels. Their spacing, their approach angles, their communication, none of it matched the desperation of men fighting to survive. These were professionals. So why were they here? Why this valley? Why now? The questions pressed on her, heavier than the rifle against her shoulder. She trained her scope on the upper ridge, but the wind dragged dust across the glass, obscuring her view. She wiped it quickly, but her pulse spiked. Dust meant movement, and movement meant opportunity for the enemy. The radio crackled. Unknown shooter Alina, this is Sergeant Cole. We're seeing movement again. Can you confirm? His voice had shifted. Not fear, not panic. Something else, something slowly rooting itself in the space between them. Trust. Alina didn't want it. Trust made things messy. Trust made things personal. And personal was the last thing she could afford. Movement confirmed, she said, keeping her tone cool, steady, distant. Don't expose yourselves. Cole exhaled a quiet, frustrated breath. You expect us to just sit here while you take on all of them alone? Yes. Her answer was immediate, too immediate. Cole let the silence stretch. That's not how this works. It's how it has to, she replied. Your job is to survive. And yours is what exactly? To atone. The word burned inside her, but she didn't say it. Instead, she scanned the valley again. Something was wrong, out of rhythm. A vague tension hung in the air like the pause before a storm breaks. Then she saw it. A flicker of reflected light deeper in the mountains. A glint, small but unmistakable. Not sunlight, not metal from a rifle. This reflection had a pattern, a pulse, a direction. Optics. Someone on the far ridge was watching her through a scope. Not the Rangers. Not the attackers she'd been picking off. Someone else. Someone with elevation. Someone intentionally positioned to observe her. Her stomach tightened. Alina, Cole asked, what do you see? She didn't answer immediately. She didn't want to confirm what she already knew. This valley wasn't just a trap for the Rangers. It was a trap for her. A cold wave slid through her as she adjusted the dial on her scope, sharpening the distance. The glare faded gradually. And then, there it was. The outline of a man lying prone at near maximum range, scope trained in her direction, body positioned with the unmistakable stillness of someone who had done this 1,000 times. A sniper. Her equal. Maybe better. Her blood chilled. Alina, Cole repeated, now tense, talk to me. She exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that came before hard truths. "You're not the only ones in danger," she murmured. Cole's tone sharpened. "What does that mean?" "It means," she whispered, "they brought their own long gun." That landed like a stone dropped into a well, deep, hollow, echoing long after the sound vanished. "You saw him?" Cole asked. "Yes." "Range?" "Too far to rush, close enough to kill." He swore under his breath, the kind of curse a man uses when he realizes the rules of survival just shifted. "How long have you known he was there?" he demanded. Elena swallowed, "Just now." Cole paused again, wrestling with something she could practically hear. "Is he aiming at you?" "Yes." The word hung between them with terrifying clarity. For a moment the valley felt smaller, more fragile. "Elena," Cole said slowly, "why would they send someone like that after you?" She didn't want to answer. Because the truth was wrapped in years of secrecy, decisions made behind sealed doors, missions the public never learned about, missions she never told anyone about, missions that had ended not with medals but with quiet debriefings and haunted eyes. "Elena," Cole repeated more gently, "why are they here?" She locked her jaw. "I don't know." It wasn't a lie, not entirely, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Below, the attackers moved faster now, emboldened by the presence of their sniper. They spread wide, forcing her to choose targets carefully. Each shot she took revealed her position more clearly. The sniper across the valley was adjusting, learning her rhythm, marking the dust signatures of her gunshots. She had minutes, maybe less. "Elena, do we move?" Cole pressed. "No," she said sharply. "You move, you die." "Then what do we do?" She paused, forcing herself to breathe, to think. "You wait for my signal." "What signal?" "You'll know it." Even she didn't know what the signal would be yet. She only knew she needed a plan, and quickly. She adjusted her scope again, trying to get a clearer view of the enemy sniper. The distance was almost at her limit. She could hit him, maybe, but it would require perfect conditions, perfect timing, and zero hesitation. But hesitation was her enemy now, because her last long-range shot had cost a child his life. And here she was again, trying to decide whether she could trust herself with another impossible distance, another target she might not fully see, another decision she might regret for the rest of her life. Her hand trembled. Not much, but enough. She pulled it back, grounding her grip against the rifle stock. She whispered, barely audible even to herself. "You have to do this." The sniper across the valley shifted, sunlight flashing faintly off his scope. He had her locked. "Elena," Cole said suddenly, voice tight, "what if he fires first?" "He won't." "How do you know?" "Because he's waiting for the moment I take my shot." She could almost feel Cole blanch on the other end of the radio. "You're telling me this guy, he's baiting you?" "Yes." "And if you miss?" She didn't answer. Her silence told them everything. It meant she would die. It meant the Rangers would follow. It meant everything in this valley hinged on whether she could overcome the one failure that had defined her for years. She exhaled. The wind shifted, warm left to right, strong. Not ideal. She waited, listened, measured, and then a sound she hadn't expected. A faint, tiny metallic click. Her enemy rechambering a round. He was ready. So was she. "Elena," Cole whispered, "if you can hear me, whatever you're about to do, we're with you." She closed her eyes, letting the words settle. For the first time in years, she didn't feel completely alone on a ridge. And in that breath, quiet, fragile, human, she steadied the rifle, aligned her scope on the distant glint of glass, and whispered to the mountains. "Not today." Then she squeezed the trigger. What happens in the instant between pulling the trigger and hearing the impact? Alina had asked herself that question 1,000 times in her life, but never had it felt so heavy, so stretched, so unforgiving. The moment elongated, an endless thread of silence between two irrevocable choices, and in that thin sliver of time she felt everything. The wind brushing her cheek, the earth steady beneath her ribs, the familiar ache in her shoulder, the fear she didn't want to admit. The shot cracked through the valley like a declaration. It ripped from her barrel, slicing the air with a force that felt almost personal. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. She watched the bullet carve through distance, through dust, through her own doubt. And then impact. Not a body falling, not a scream, not the dull thud she'd come to expect when a life ended at the other end of her scope. A spark. Her bullet hit something, metal hard angled. The enemy sniper had shifted at the last possible fraction of a second, turning what should have been a clean hit into a ricochet. Her shot skipped off the edge of his scope, shattering the glass, but not the man behind it. She knew it instantly. He was still alive. Alina, Cole's voice hit her ear like a hammer. What happened, did you? No, her whisper scraped raw against her throat. I missed. She hated the word. It tasted like guilt, like memory, like everything she tried to bury. She rarely missed, but rare wasn't the same as never. She searched the ridge again, fast, desperate. The sniper had rolled behind cover, vanished into the rocks. Smart, efficient, already repositioning. He was hunting her now. Alina, get down, Cole shouted. But she didn't move. Movement created noise. Movement created shadows. Movement created targets. Instead, she went still, perfectly still, letting the wind settle, letting her breathing return to its rhythm. She needed to think. She needed to understand what he was doing. He was better trained than she expected. Not reckless, not emotional, not careless, which meant something terrifying. He wasn't here for the Rangers. He'd been sent for her. The realization cut through her like a blade she'd been pretending wasn't there. She could feel old instincts rising, instincts she thought she'd abandoned in deserts and mountain passes a lifetime ago. Alina, Cole pressed, talk to me, what's happening? She forced herself to respond. He shifted. I hit his scope, but not him. That still buys us time. No, she murmured. It buys him information. He knows my timing now, my rhythm, my aim. Then we move, Cole argued. No, if you move, he'll adjust, and he's faster than you think. Alina. Sergeant, she snapped, I've faced shooters like him. You haven't. Stay put. The silence that followed wasn't fear, it was respect and worry. Alina scanned the ridge again, searching for the smallest break in cover, the slightest hint of movement. Nothing. The sniper was patient, experienced. He was waiting for her next mistake. She needed to reposition. But movement meant risk, and for the first time since the fight began, she couldn't shake the tremor in her fingers. The ghost of the memory returned, one she'd spent years trying to suffocate. The child behind the truck, the split-second misread, the innocence caught in the space where she expected danger. Her breath hitched. She couldn't let that memory control her now, not with lives depending on her. She pressed her palm against the earth, grounding herself. You are here. You are present. This is now. The past had claws, but the present had urgency. Slowly, carefully, she began to crawl backward, pulling her body low to the ground, using rocks as cover. Every motion was deliberate, quiet, calculated. She had maybe 30 seconds before the sniper relocated and reacquired her. 20 seconds. 10. She slid behind a boulder and exhaled sharply, not out of relief but necessity. The air felt thinner somehow, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Alina, Cole asked again, softer now. I'm repositioning. Can we help? No, she paused, but you can survive. Another quiet beat passed through the radio. You sound like someone who stopped believing she deserves to. Her jaw tightened, too personal, too close, too raw. This isn't about me, she said. Everything about today is about you, Cole countered. You saved us, you're still saving us. Alina swallowed hard. Compliments like that tangled with the guilt she never voiced. You don't understand, she said quietly. I wasn't supposed to pick up this rifle again. So why did you? He asked. She hesitated. The truth lay beneath her ribs, fragile and dangerous. Because no one else answered, she said finally. And that alone had been enough to break her promise. Before Cole could respond, she spotted movement at the far ridge, small, subtle, but unmistakable. A shadow sliding along the rocks. The enemy sniper had moved higher, gaining better elevation, angling for a shot that would cut through her entire line of retreat. He was good. Too good. Her heartbeat slowed. Her world narrowed. She repositioned the rifle, sliding it across the dirt with practiced care. She calculated distance, wind drift, elevation, humidity. Her fingers steadied. Her breath softened. Her body remembered the form, the stillness, the surrender it required. But her heart remembered the last time she'd aimed at a silhouette she couldn't fully see. The last time she fired before she should have. The last time her shot stole a life she had no right to take. Her finger hovered over the trigger. She couldn't do it. She tried to press. Her hand refused. Alina, Cole whispered, "What's wrong?" She bit back the truth, but emotion cracked through her voice like a fault line. I can't take the shot." A long silence, the kind that felt like the world holding still. "Alina," Cole said gently, "listen to me." His tone wasn't commanding, not ordering, not tactical. "Human. You saved 6 lives today. Don't let one mistake from your past keep you from saving more." Her eyes stung, she blinked hard. "You don't understand," she rasped. "Then help me," he said softly. "Help me understand." She shook her head even though he couldn't see it. "I took a shot once that I shouldn't have, a shot that cost a child his life." There it was, the truth she'd never spoken aloud, the truth that had hollowed her out. The radio stayed quiet. She regretted saying it instantly. But then Cole's voice came back, steady and unshakable. "Alina, you are not the sum of the worst moment of your career. You are the reason we're still breathing." She pressed her forehead to the rifle stock, letting the words settle like dust in her lungs. "You can do this," Cole said, "not because you're perfect, but because you're still here." Her breath steadied. Her hands steadied. Her aim steadied. She aligned the scope again, found the glint of metal, the faint curve of fabric, the slightest rise of a shoulder. She whispered to herself, just loud enough that the wind could carry it away. "Still here." Then she pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the valley, sharp, decisive, and final. She didn't know yet if it hit. But this time she didn't flinch. She didn't hide. She didn't run. She stayed. And for the first time in years, she felt the faintest spark of something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. What breaks first in a moment like that, the silence or the fear? Alina waited for the answer as the echo of her shot faded into the mountains, swallowed by distance and dust. She didn't breathe. She didn't blink. She didn't dare. 3 miles away, the distant ridge stayed still. Too still. She kept her eye pressed to the scope until her vision blurred at the edges. She searched for movement, anything, the slightest shift of fabric, a slump, a roll, a shadow no longer connected to breath. Nothing. "Alina," Cole's voice drifted through the static, cautious, hopeful, afraid. "Tell me you got him." "I don't know." The words felt heavy, like they sank straight into the earth beneath her. "Can you see him?" Cole asked. No. She forced herself to inhale, slow and deliberate. The valley seemed to wait with her. Wind paused, dust suspended midair. She wiped the sweat from her forehead, though her hands trembled just enough to betray her. Alina, did you miss again? She didn't answer right away. She wanted clarity before she spoke, but clarity wasn't coming. Her shot had felt clean, dead on, perfect. But perfect didn't guarantee anything. Not from this range, not with wind shifting at the last second, not when her target was someone just as skilled as she was. Someone who knew how she thought. Someone who had waited for her rhythm. Someone who might still be alive. She lowered her rifle half an inch, scanning beyond her usual field, trying to anticipate where he would crawl to, how he would reposition. Then she saw it. A faint disturbance in the dust behind the ridge, subtle, almost invisible, a smear in the dirt, a drag mark. Someone had moved, but whether they'd moved because they'd been hit or because they'd avoided being hit, she couldn't tell. Her chest tightened. Alina, Cole pressed, what do you see? Tracks, she murmured, drag marks. So he's dead. Not necessarily. The words stiffened the air around her. Below, the Rangers shifted, their movements small but tense. Even from 3 miles away, she could sense the ripple of dread passing through them. They had placed their faith in her hands. Now those hands shook. She clenched her jaw to steady herself. No more shaking, no more doubt, not now. Alina, Cole said softly, what do you need? The question caught her off guard. Most leaders she'd worked with in the past never asked what she needed. They told her what she was required to do. They gave her angles and distances and timelines. They didn't consider her humanity. But Cole asked, not as a sergeant, not as a survivor, but as someone who saw her as more than a weapon. She didn't know how to answer. She swallowed hard, I need you to stay alive. Cole released a soft breath, something like a small, tired smile hidden in the static. We're trying. She dragged her focus back to the ridge. The distant dust still glimmered with movement, not enough to target but enough to confirm the enemy sniper wasn't dead. Injured maybe, but alive. And alive meant dangerous. Alina, Cole said, he's not going to stop coming for you. I know. What do we do? Her answer came from a part of herself she thought she'd lost. The part that once led missions into impossible terrain. The part that could see 3 steps ahead. The part that understood battles didn't end when the shooting slowed. You follow my instructions, she said. Exactly, no improvising. Understood. She steadied her breath. You stay hidden behind the rock shelf until I tell you otherwise. Copy. Another beat of silence. Alina, Cole added, voice gentler this time. What about you? She shifted her rifle again. I'm going after him. Cole's reaction was immediate. No, you're not. You're one person against. Against someone who knows exactly where I am, she cut in. If I stay here, I'm a target. If I move, I'm a ghost. A long breath. You're hurt. No. You're scared. She hesitated. Yes. The honesty cracked something open between them, something fragile, something real. But fear doesn't decide what happens next, she said. I do. Alina, wait. If you leave the ridge, who covers us? Distance will. They can't hit you from that far without exposing themselves. You have cover. He doesn't, not anymore. The radio shook slightly with Cole's frustration. You're talking like you're. I'm not saying goodbye, she said, sharper than she meant. I'm saying I'm doing my job. And what's our job? Cole asked quietly. To live. A crack of gunfire suddenly burst through the air, not from Alina's rifle, not from the attackers near the valley floor. From the far ridge. The enemy sniper had fired again. Alina dropped flat, the ground shaking faintly an inch from her face. The bullet hit the rock behind her, sending fragments spraying into her arm. She hissed, rolling to the side. "Alina," Cole shouted, "talk to me." "I'm fine," she muttered through clenched teeth, though blood trickled down her wrist. "He wasn't aiming to kill, he was flushing me out." "Why?" "Because he wanted her closer. Because he wanted a clean shot. Because long-range duels weren't won by luck. They were won by nerve, by patience, by understanding exactly how much pressure the other sniper could withstand before breaking." "He's shifting position," she said, "moving down the ridge." "So he is hurt. Or overconfident." She wiped dust from her eyes. "Either one can get me killed if I guess wrong." She scanned again. Nothing but rock and distant heat shimmer. The sniper had vanished into terrain even she couldn't fully read. "Alina," Cole said slowly, "you need to fall back." She shook her head even though he couldn't see it. "He'll chase me downhill. I need elevation." "You can't climb under fire." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I already have." Before Cole could argue again, she slung her rifle over her shoulder, tightening the strap. She moved silently along the ridge, using every shadow, every fold of terrain she'd memorized over years of sunrise walks meant to quiet her demons. Her demons followed anyway. Her breath grew shallow, not from effort, from memory. The last time she'd chased an enemy sniper into high ground, she hadn't come back the same. Her shot had ended a life, but the wrong one. The wrong small silhouette. Her chest tightened, her heartbeat fluttered. But then Cole's voice broke through again, low, steady, real. "Alina, whatever happened before, you're not repeating it. Not today, not here." His words steadied her steps. She climbed. Higher, higher, until the ridge gave way to a narrow plateau, a perfect counter-sniper perch. She dropped to her stomach, unshouldered her rifle, and scanned the ridge again. Her breathing slowed, her hands steadied. And then, there, a flicker of movement behind a jagged stone outcrop, barely visible, cleverly hidden, but visible to someone who knew exactly what to look for. She exhaled, tasting dust and fear and determination. "Sergeant," she whispered, "I found him." Cole didn't speak. "Alina," he finally breathed. "Yes." "Bring him down." Her cheek pressed into the rifle stock, steady and familiar. Her heartbeat synced with the wind. Her breathing aligned with the mountains. She centered her crosshairs on the smallest patch of exposed shadow, the only part of the sniper that couldn't be hidden by the rock. She waited. Stillness. Silence. Focus. And then, with a voice soft enough to feel like a promise she wasn't sure she deserved, she whispered. "One shot." Her finger tightened. Her rifle cracked. The bullet flew. And this time, she didn't doubt. She didn't shake. She didn't look away. She watched. She knew. And as the distant silhouette slumped, falling sideways out of sight, Alina exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. She had done it. She had won. But something about the way the body fell, the angle, the limpness, the stillness, filled her with a dread far heavier than victory. Because the moment the sniper hit the ground, something else moved behind him. Someone else. Someone she hadn't seen. Someone standing. Watching her. Waiting. Why was the figure behind the fallen sniper just standing there, unmoving, unarmed, almost expectant? Alina couldn't breathe for a moment. Her pulse, steady seconds ago, stuttered into confusion. The shape wasn't crouched behind cover, wasn't aiming a weapon, wasn't rushing to fire back. It simply stepped forward, letting the dying sniper's body slump fully into the dust. A silhouette alone against the ridge. A silhouette watching her, not with aggression but with recognition. "Alina," Cole's voice buzzed, distant and small against the roar in her ears. "Alina, what do you see?" She didn't answer, not immediately. Her throat tightened too much for words. The figure was smaller than she expected, leaner. Their stance was that of a trained marksman or soldier, more deliberate, familiar in a way she couldn't name. The stranger stepped into the sun, letting the light break across their features. A young woman, no older than 20. Dark hair tied loosely, clothes dusty from the ridge, no weapon in her hands, no fear in her eyes. Elena's breath caught. A civilian out here. Impossible. The ridge was too remote, too dangerous, too exposed. What was she doing behind a professional sniper? Why hadn't he fired at her? Why had he let her stand so close? Elena, Cole pressed, worry sharpening his tone. I need you to tell me what's happening. She swallowed, but the tension stayed. There's someone else, she whispered. What do you mean someone else? An enemy? I don't think so. The young woman bent down beside the fallen sniper, not in panic, not in anger, but with gentle familiarity. She cradled the man's head with a quiet tenderness Elena recognized far too well. Not lovers. Not fighters. Family. A daughter, maybe. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. The young woman looked up, straight toward Elena's ridge, her expression unreadable from this distance, yet unmistakably human. Grief didn't distort her posture. Rage didn't ignite her stance. Instead, she simply bowed her head over the fallen sniper's chest, as though acknowledging something inevitable, something long expected. Elena, Cole said, what's your position? Do you need support? No, she murmured, stay where you are. She kept her scope trained, not to fire, not to threaten, but because she couldn't look away. Is she armed? Cole asked. No. So she's not a threat. Elena hesitated. Her hands tightened around the rifle. No, she said quietly, but she's not innocent either. Explain. She breathed out slow, painful. She was with him close, too close to be random. The girl lifted something from beside the sniper's body, a small identification tag, metal glinting faintly. She held it between her palms for a long moment, then tied it around her own wrist with deliberate care. Not a military tag. A keepsake. A ritual. A goodbye. Elena, Cole repeated, voice softer. Are you aiming at her? No. Then what are you doing? She didn't know, watching, understanding, hurting. The young woman stood, the wind catching her hair, lifting dust around her feet. She didn't run, didn't hide, didn't fear the sniper who'd killed her companion. She simply lifted her gaze back toward Elena's ridge and raised her hand. Not surrender. Not threat. A gesture of warning. 3 taps to her own heart. 3 taps to her temple. 1 slow point toward the valley below. Elena's pulse spiked. She recognized that signal. She hadn't seen it in years, but she knew it instantly. It meant danger isn't over. It meant more are coming. Elena, Cole's voice sharpened. What does that mean? It means she's telling me us to move. Cole swore under his breath. Since when do enemies give warnings? Since when do I shoot a sniper with a civilian at his back? She whispered. A haunted stillness settled over her chest. She couldn't shake the image. The young woman standing where a child once had been on a different ridge, at a different time, turning a battlefield into a lifelong scar. Elena, what's happening? Cole insisted. Should we fall back, should we? Before she could answer, distant shouts echoed from the lower eastern ridge. Not one voice. Many, dozens. Elena whipped her scope toward the sound. Black-clad figures were emerging from the ravine, fast, coordinated, heavily armed. Not the 6 attackers from earlier, not the sniper's team. Another group. A bigger group. A group that moved like a trained strike unit. The girl on the far ridge had already turned toward them, stepping back, disappearing behind the rocks as if she knew exactly where to hide from the coming fight. Elena, Cole shouted, talk to me. She could barely force the words out. 50, maybe more. What? They're sweeping the valley. For us? Cole asked, panic creeping into his voice. No, Alina whispered, for me. The truth tasted like iron. Some part of her had known this fight wasn't random. She felt it in the silence that morning, in the way the attackers worked as if following a plan that had nothing to do with 6 rangers and an overturned truck. This wasn't an ambush gone wrong. This was a hunt. Alina, Cole said, slow now, grounded, pulling himself together, you need to fall back to your cabin. You need to run. Now. No, she said immediately. If I run, they'll go through your position to get to me. Our position isn't your responsibility, he argued. Yes, it is. Why? Cole demanded. Why is it your responsibility? The truth hit her so hard she felt tears sting her eyes. Because I answered the call. Alina. And because I'll be damned, she said, voice cracking, if these men die because of my past. Cole didn't answer. Perfect silence stretched between them, not disbelief, not confusion. Acceptance. Alina, he said finally, if they want you, then we protect you. The words shook her more than any gunfire. No, she whispered, you protect yourselves, that's what matters. The hell it is, Cole snapped. You've been saving us for the last hour. We're returning the favor. Tell us where you need us. She closed her eyes. For years she'd lived believing no one would stand for her. Not after the accident, not after she disappeared into the quiet of the hills, not after she abandoned the uniform that had shaped her entire life. She lived as though her existence had become a burden, a reminder, a mistake. And now 6 wounded rangers were offering to stand for her. Something inside her cracked, not pain, not guilt. Gratitude. She breathed it in like oxygen she had long been deprived of. Then she looked through her scope again, at the growing wave of armed men closing in. Sergeant, she said slowly, listen carefully. We're listening, Cole answered, steady now. You're going to move in 20 seconds toward the east slope. There's a blind spot they won't expect. And you, Cole asked. She pulled her rifle close, settling into the earth like she belonged there. I'll cover you. A long pause. Alina, he said softly, this isn't just about covering us. No, she admitted. It's about finishing what they came here to start. And what's that? She swallowed hard. They came here to erase me. Another moment of silence, this one heavy, cold, resolute. Then Cole said the only thing he could. Then let's make damn sure they fail. She steadied her breath, reached for her spare magazine, locked it in place. The mountains seemed to inhale with her. And for the first time since she'd left the service, she didn't feel like a ghost in her own story. She felt alive. She felt necessary. She felt ready. Alina, Cole whispered, we move on your mark. She raised her rifle, found the closest target, let her heartbeat become the metronome she'd trusted for decades. Mark. And as the rangers began to move, Alina fired the first shot of a battle she had spent years trying to avoid, but could no longer outrun. What did it cost a person to stand alone between danger and the people depending on them? Alina felt the weight settle across her shoulders as she fired again, the recoil echoing through the ridge like a drumbeat. She didn't track the bodies falling. She didn't count how many were left. She focused only on movement, on distance, on breath. On staying alive long enough to give the rangers a chance. Below her, Cole and his men scrambled along the east slope just as she'd told them, staying low, using the rock curvature as cover. She followed their motion with a soldier's instinct, not a sniper's. Quick, tight steps. No exposed silhouettes. They were hurt, restless, exhausted, but moving. Still moving. The group sweeping the valley was larger than she'd estimated, closer to 60 now, maybe more. She couldn't see all of them through the dust, but she saw enough to know they weren't just hunting. They were closing like a net, coordinated, intentional, relentless. Alina, Cole's voice came through the radio breathless. We're halfway across the ridge. Keep going. What about you? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she shifted her position, sliding down a narrow crease in the terrain until she had a better angle on the advancing line. Wind shifted around her, hot and dry. Sweat stung her eyes. Her muscles screamed from the stress, but she ignored it. Pain was just part of the breath. Alina, Cole pushed. Talk to me. I'm staying here. No, no, you're not, he argued. You get down this mountain, you come with us. We're not leaving you. Yes, she whispered, adjusting her scope with calm finality. You are. A long beat of silence followed, too heavy to ignore. Alina, Cole said quietly, why does it sound like you're making peace with something you shouldn't be? She almost smiled. Because he could hear it, that subtle softening in her voice, the kind that only comes when a person has made a difficult choice long before they say it aloud. I'm not dying today, she said, but I'm not running either. You can't hold them alone. Maybe not. Then what's your plan? She steadied her breath. To make them believe I can. She fired into the advancing line again, 2 clean hits in rapid succession. The enemy broke formation, momentarily stunned by her precision. That pause bought the Rangers seconds they desperately needed. Seconds that only she could give them. She dragged her sleeve across her forehead, smearing dust into her brow. Her arm throbbed from the earlier shrapnel hit, but she didn't let her hands shake. She couldn't. Alina, Cole said again, voice raw, they're coming too fast, you need to move. No, she said softly, I need to stand. Her voice surprised her, not for its strength but for the softness in it, the acceptance. Not defeat. Understanding. She had run from her past for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand in front of danger and not flinch, to face something head-on, to trust herself. Her rifle barked again, sharp, decisive, controlled. One more threat dropped. But there were many more. Alina, Cole snapped, answer me, are you hit? No. Then what the hell is going on? She watched the dust clouds tighten as the enemy squad condensed into a more aggressive formation, moving faster now. The valley floor trembled with their steps. It felt like the world shifting beneath her. Sergeant, she said quietly, I can't outrun what they came here for. And what is that? He demanded. Closure, she whispered. He cursed under his breath, not at her, at the situation, at the impossible burden she carried. Alina, listen to me. Whatever you think you deserve, whatever you think you need to face, you don't do it alone. Not anymore. Her chest tightened. His words slipped past her defenses like sunlight through broken shutters. I know. Then come with us. I can't. She steadied her scope again. If I move, they'll see you, they'll follow, they'll kill you. You don't know that. I do, she whispered, because I know how men like them think. She took another shot, dropping the closest threat. Dust exploded around the others. Shouts rose from the formation, commands echoing across the valley. Alina, Cole insisted, we can fight together. She almost let herself believe him. She almost let herself run with them. She almost let herself imagine a world in which she wasn't dragging the chains of an old mistake behind her everywhere she went. But then she saw the girl again. The girl who'd stood behind the enemy sniper. The girl who had warned her. She appeared again on the far ridge, expression unreadable, body poised against the rock like a shadow born from grief and fire. She lifted her hand once more, slow, deliberate, and pointed toward Alina. Alina met her gaze across the impossible distance. And for a moment, neither was a soldier, neither was an enemy. They were 2 women standing on opposite sides of the same loss. Then the girl turned and slipped back into the rocks. A warning. A farewell. Maybe both. Alina, Cole said, soft now, pleading, Do not do this alone. Her heart cracked a little at the sincerity. I'm not alone, she whispered. Another wave of attackers crested the ridge below her. She fired again, shifting position between shots, making herself a moving ghost along the rocks. She wasn't trying to kill all of them. She was trying to stall them, confuse them, make them think she was everywhere at once. Her movements were methodical, precise, deliberate, ghost-like. This ridge was her home, these angles her armor, these mountains her allies. She was no longer the sniper who had fled her past. She was the woman who had answered the call. Elena, Cole shouted suddenly, urgent, panicked. His tone punched through her focus. Elena, they're flanking you. She spun her scope west. He was right. A smaller group had broken off, attempting to climb toward her position unseen. She moved fast, too fast for safety, but necessity always outweighed caution. She repositioned, breathed, fired. A clean hit on the lead climber sent the others scattering back into cover. But not far. Not enough. She could feel the valley tightening. Elena, Cole's voice trembled now, where are you? She considered lying, not to deceive but to comfort. Instead, she whispered, right where I need to be. Elena, please. Sergeant, she said gently, you kept your men alive when the world expected you to fail. That matters, let that be enough. What about you? He asked. She closed her eyes for a beat. I'll be okay. It wasn't a promise, it was faith. She lifted her rifle one last time, feeling the breath of the mountain settle around her like a cloak. She aligned her crosshairs with the next wave of attackers, heart steady, hands firm. Not because she wanted to prove anything. Not because she wanted redemption. But because she finally understood something she had forgotten. Bravery wasn't the roar of battle. It was the quiet decision to stand. Even when standing hurt. Even when standing cost. She fired, and the valley erupted in chaos, echoes, shouts, scrambling silhouettes. Cole's voice crackled again, broken by breath and distance. Elena, are you still there? She wiped dust from her eyes and whispered, steady and soft. Still here. And as the mountains swallowed the sound of her rifle, she let the truth settle into her bones. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes the quietest soul on the hill carries the loudest kind of bravery. If you want, I can now combine all 8 parts into one seamless document. Format for a YouTube narration script. Add packing cues for voiceover. Create a title plus description plus chapters. Just tell me what you'd like.